eat on camera.
Right. Okay, welcome. Good to see all of you. Looks like we got Gloria, Arthur, Lonnie, Bubby, and Zadie, Melissa, Toby, Erwin, Phyllis. Okay, well, welcome. We find ourselves on Yud Zayin Amud Bey 17b.
Yeah.
17b, my friends. And
I'm
I
trying.
believe that's where we're at.
You put my arm away.
Yeah. We're up to V'chol Heicha Del Shav Shiraihu. It's about a quarter way down, or maybe just shy of it's about a quarter way down. So I think it probably should be, there should be some indication in the art scrolls for those who are using it. That's a new paragraph. I would guess it's either toward the end of the first page in art scroll or the beginning of the second page. If anyone finds the words, just shout it out for the benefit of everyone else.
Uh-huh.
Where was it, Toby?
V'chol heicha delo shavu.
Yeah.
17B1 at the bottom right.
Okay, there we go. So just a recap of what we should expect. So previously we had a machlokas about the nature of pasal schach. Everyone agrees that when you have pasal schach at the edge of the sukkah, you were given up to 4 amos of latitude, and it'll be considered basically non-problematic because we could arguably, depending how you understand it, make use of dofen akuma, which we see as an extension of the wall. The debate was whether we have the same shear of Daled Amos for when there's pasal schach in middle of the sukkah. Do we still get to apply 4 amos, or does it get knocked down to a mere 4 tfachim, which is, I know both of them are 4, but an amma, it could be like 6 tfachim, depending how you measure it. So this is significantly less. And we had a debate last time whether we could combine shiurim. For instance, if you have an air gap that's less than 3 tfachim next to pasal schach that's less than 4 tfachim, would they combine together? And the argument that was made was that when it comes to combining 4 amos and 4 amos of pasal schach with 3, or less than 4 amos of pasal schach with less than 3 tfachim of air, they're not comparable measurements. 4 tfachim of non-kosher schach and 3 tfachim of air are fundamentally the same issue of a lack of kosher schach in that area. But when the 4 amos is a shear to pasal, and therefore the assumption that the Gemara just left off with is that when you have 2 fundamentally different kinds of measurements, it means that they can't combine together. Again, an analogous area of halacha that I think we mentioned last time was if I eat less than a kizayis of food and I drink less than a revius of water and I do it all at the same time, they would not combine together to make a shear for me to make a bracha achrona, because they're 2 different measurements, so they're not mitzdarif, they don't combine together. Okay, so this is where we pick up. The Gemara is asking, is it true that whenever the 2 shiurim are not the same, that they can't combine just because they have different measurements? V'hatnan, we learn in Mishnayos and Kalim, okay, so basically the measurements for what's the minimum dimensions of something for it to be makabel tuma. Habeged shlosha al shlosha. So a beged is 3 by 3 tfachim. Hasak arba arba. Sackcloth is 4 by 4. Or chamisha for leather. Chamisha al chamisha. Mapats for a mat. Shisha al shisha, 6 by 6. Utani Allah. And this was explained. Habeged vasak, hasakva or ha'orva mapat mitzdarfin zemzeh, that they could combine together to meet the higher threshold in order to be big enough to be makabel tuma. But wait a minute, didn't we just get a list that each and every one of these materials has their own separate threshold for how big they have to be to makabel tuma? So how can they combine together? I thought we just established that the same way you can't mix, the shear for airspace and the shear for pasal schach together because they're different measurements. Why am I allowed to mix these 2 together? So the answer is Hasam Kidiktani Taima Amar Rabbi Shimon Matam Hor Uin Litame Moshav. What's the reason? How do we come up with these measurements? Because they're trying to figure out there's a tumah of Moshav when you sit on something, or midras when you tread on something, then you put your weight on it. That's a way of transferring tumah. So what's the reason here? How do we get to all these measurements? So we're trying to figure out tumas midras kitnan. Hanekatsea mikul and tefach al tefach tame tefach al tefach lamay chazi. But the truth be told is that if I wanted to patch up the saddle area of a donkey, so if I wanted to use any of these materials to patch it on, if I cut it out specifically as a patch, I didn't even attach it yet, even if it's just a mere tefach by a tefach, it would still be significant enough to be mikabel tuma. And so since they share in a certain instance a baseline shear in common, all these materials, if you intend to use it to patch up the saddle of the donkey, it only has to be a tefach by tefach, no matter what the material is. Well, therefore, my apologies. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, now I hear you.
Okay. I left off. We're talking about that they have the same tefach by tefach measurement when it comes to making a patch, right? That's where we left off. Is that where it cut out?
Donkey was the last word.
Yes. Okay. So for patching things up, a tefach by tefach is the minimum measurement, and they all share that same measurement in common when it comes to defining if it's significant enough to serve as a patch. So because in some instances they do share the same measurement, the same threshold. In other areas where they don't share the same threshold, it's not such a far-fetched thing to say that they could still combine together the same way that they share commonality in other areas of Hilchos Tuma. Now, just interesting, Tosas points out, if you look at the full text, I looked it up to make sure, the Mishnah in Kalim tells us that there's a difference. I'll just read for you. It's a Tosas on top. That's what we read so far. That a garment is it becomes tameh when you have 3 by 3 tfachim. So that's for midras. That's for, if you're sitting on it, you're putting your weight on it. Mishum shalosh al shalosh l'tameh mace. But it's, I believe, 3 by 3, I think, finger breadths, if I'm not mistaken, when it comes to tameh mace. So just to point out that depending on what kind of tuma and what kind of use it's for, the measurements will differ. So it's a very long mesechta for a good reason. Okay, back into the Gemara. Okay, so we just finished that section. Basically, as long as there's some baseline commonality between the different materials, so it means they're fundamentally all in the same category, and therefore they can combine together. But coming back to Sukkah, the psul of schach that's 4 amos is fundamentally different than the psul of avir, of air, that's 3 tfachim, and therefore they do not combine together. End of this section of the Gemara. Okay. To understand the next section and the rest of our Gemara for tonight, we need to do a little bit of chazara of what happened previously in our shir on Yud Zayin Amud Av on 17a. So let me just jog our memory a little bit. You can feel free to look back at 17a at Yud Zayin Amud Av if you like to. But basically, toward a little bit above the middle area, we had a machlokus. Rabbah came to the base medrash of Rav, and the base medrash of Rav, they said that there's a distinction between pasal schach on the side of the sukkah, which is up to 4 amos you get, and pasal schach in the middle of the sukkah. And Rabbah debated with the base medrash of Rav. Rabbah said, no, you get up to 4 amos even in the middle of the sukkah. Even in the middle, you have to 4 amos. Because when you look at the Mishnah, all it talks about is 4 amos. It says nothing about 4 tfachim in our Mishnah in Zayin Amud Av. So that was the debate that we had in the previous Gemara. The Gemara now tells us, Besura Amri lahashmaitze b'hai lishna. Everything we learned until now was how this debate was related, how it was recorded in Surah. B'naharda masnu, but in Naharda, they kind of attributed these shitos, this debate, to Shmuel versus Rav, and actually Rav Rav assumes the opposite position than we were led to believe. It's going to be the same machlokes, by the way, so it shouldn't be so confusing. Just different. It's the shitos that we just saw are attributed to different people. That's it. That's the only difference over here. Nothing too new. So in our Dam Masnu, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Schach Pasel be'emsa posel ba'arba. So when you have Schach Pasel in the middle, posel ba'arba with 4 tfachim, and min hatzad posel ba'arba amos. So now, that's the position of Shmuel. Okay, so that's Rav Yehuda named Shmuel. Shmuel is taking what was originally the position of the base medrash of Rav by saying there's a distinction between pasel schach on the side versus pasel schach in the middle. Whereas V'Rav Amar bein min hatzad bein be'emtza ba'arba amos. Now Rav in this version is assuming what Rabbah said in the other version, that you get up to 4 amos even in the middle of the sukkah. For all intents and purposes, it's the same machlokes, just different people. So it's not. Now we're going to go through different passages in Mishnayos that we saw already, and we're going to try to figure out how this makes sense. It's not. Nasan Allah nesashu rachav arba tfachim. Remember this one? This was on Yudalid Amid Alf on 14a. So if one has a board that is 4 tfachim, remember we talked about this, that we had a Gezeres Tikra, that a board that's 4 tfachim is too big, it's too wide, you're going to feel like you're in your house. Ring a bell a little bit, hopefully. So, good. So if you have a board that is 4 tfachim, then kshera. So bishlama l'rav, damar bein be'emtsa, bein min hatzad, ba'arba amos, b'shemari kshera. This opinion makes sense according to Rav, because Rav says, yeah, a board that's 4 tfachim is no big deal, because I give you up to 4 amos anywhere in the sukkah. So 4 tfachim is much less than 4 amos. I'm not going to complain if there's a 4 tefach board over there. El Shmuel damar be'emtsa ba'arba amai kshera. According to Shmuel, the 4 tfachim of pasel schach invalidates the sukkah. Well, a 4 tefach board, which is inherently invalid midrabanan, takes up 4 tfachim of space. So how could that possibly be kosher according to Shmuel? So what's the answer? Shmuel reads the Mishnah as follows. Min hatzad. Shmuel just simply reads that Mishnah as referring to a non-kosher schach of 4 tfachim that's on the side of the sukkah. And that's going to be the common theme. Anytime there's an issue that we see in a Mishnah somewhere that says 4 tfachim is okay, even though it's pasel schach, that's because you have to make it ukimta and say it's on the side of the sukkah, it's at the wall, and therefore we get up to 4 amos, even according to Shmuel. Okay, and you're going to see that same thing play out again. Tashima. This one also might ring a bell. This was also on Yudalid Amid Aleph. Shnei Sedin, maybe it was Yudalid base, maybe? I have to look back. I think it starts Yudalid Aleph. Shnei Sedin mitzdarfen. If you have 2 sheets, remember 2 sheets on your schach, these would invalidate the sukkah if they're big enough. Then mitzdarfen, they would combine together to invalidate the sukkah. Shnei nisarim, 2 boards, a mitzdarfen. They do not combine to invalidate the sukkah. Rabbi Meir Omer nisarim kistin. Rabbi Meir said that boards are just as bad as the sheets. So how do we make sense of this Mishnah? Bish lama lahach lishna damarav bein be'emtsa bein minatza barba amos my mitzdarfen and dalad amos. So according to Rav, we can make sense of what's going on over here, the new interpretation of Rav, in which Rav says the issue is only up till 4 amos. So what are these boards combining to? The concern that Rabbi Meir has is that these boards are going to combine up until 4 amos and pasel the sukkah in the middle. But according to the initial interpretation of Rav on Yudzayin Amid Aleph, Damarav be'emtza barba, that in the middle, even 4 tvachim will pasel the sukkah. Hechi dami, how do I make sense of this Mishnah? Ita isbahu arba, if the boards are 4 tfachim, lamahu etzrufe, then why do I need to talk about combining the boards to reach the threshold to pasel the sukkah? They're 4 tfachim, they're inherently big enough to pasel the sukkah according to the shita of Rav. And he delays bu arba, kana ba'alma ninhu. Right? Does this sound familiar? We had the same shakavatar in the Gemara. And if each board is less than 4 tefachim, then it's no worse than putting thin little bamboo next to each other. They're inherently kosher. It's not an issue if they're right next to each other. They're kosher sukkah. It's kosher schach. So same answer. La'om d'isbu arba, umayim mitzarfim la'arba amos min hatzad. You have to make it ukimta again. That whole discussion, according to the Shita of Rav, the first Shita of Rav, is talking about when you have boards on the side of the sukkah. So they're 4 tefachim wide boards. And if you put enough 4 tefachim wide boards next to each other, then Rabbi Meir is saying they would combine together to reach the threshold of 4 amos to pass the sukkah even on the side. Okay, great. Same exact thing. We had an issue, there was an ambiguity. We just say it's not talking about the middle, it's talking about the side, and that way both sides remain defended. Any questions? There's a lot of, I even like, when I write, when I learn the Gemara beforehand, I make like shoulder notes in the margins, just so for myself, I like to structure the Gemara for myself. So I wrote on the side over here that the Gemara just basically goes back and deals with a lot of things that we already addressed. So just think of this as like a good Chazar shir, or hopefully a good Chazar shir, maybe just a Chazar shir. So Tashima, one final question, and with this we'll get us onto Yud Chesem and Alf, God willing, and with that we'll conclude. Tashima, Sicha b'nisarn shel eres. So it's going to sound very similar. This is on Yudalid Amid Beis, and it'll come up again on Lamed Zayin Amid Aleph in case you miss it. Toshima, Sicha b'nisarn shel erez, if you use boards of cedar, Sheish ben Arba, that each of them are 4 tefachim. Remember, so 4 tefachim is a big issue, right? Kriseir's Tikra. Divrei Akol Psula, both Rabbi Huda and Rabbi Meir are good friends from a few dapim ago. They say that 4 tefachim is puzzle. Those boards are too wide to use for schach. So, but when it is less than 4 tefachim, right between 3 to 4, Rabbi Meir posa Rabbi Huda machshir. So that's the machlokes Rabbi Huda Rabbi Meir that we've gone over many times. That according to some, they debate between 3 to 4 tefachim if that's too wide or if it's sufficient and can be used for schach. Umod Rabbi Meir concedes shem yesh behen neser neser kamali neser. Shemaniach pesel beinehem ukshera. Rameir says that as long as you between each board you put the same amount of kosher schach in between, then you'll have a kosher sukkah. What's going on over here? How do we make sense of this odd strategy of Rabbi Meir? Well, according to the Man Damar, whoever you want to attribute it to, that you get up to Daled Amos, you get up to 3.9 Amos of non-kosher schach even in the middle of the sukkah. Well, then it makes sense what Rabbi Meir is suggesting. So you don't have contiguous 4 Amos of non-kosher schach because you're interspersing kosher, non-kosher, kosher, non-kosher. So okay, very good. Ella Leman Omar be'emtsa barba Mike Shera. But according to whoever it is that says that you only get up to 4 tefachim, and at 4 tefachim, that's when the puzzle schach invalidates the entire sukkah in the middle of the sukkah. So Amai Kishera, how is Rabbi Meir's suggestion helpful? Because you have each board is 4 tefachim wide, which means that each board on its own is enough to invalidate the legitimacy of the sukkah. So what's the answer? Amar Rav Huna, Bered Rav Yeshua, and we saw this also previously. Hacha b'sukkah d'lahavi el shmona mitzutzamos askinan. We have a sukkah that's precisely 8 amos. The yav neser upesel, neser upesel, neser upesel. So you start on one side, board, kosher schach, board, kosher schach, board, kosher schach, mehai gisa, neser upesel, neser upesel, neser upesel, mehai gisa, and then you start also board, pesel from the other side. Tahavlahu shnei psam be'emtsa v'ga hechsher sukkah be'emtsa. And what basically happens is that if you start board, right, board, kosher, eventually you wind up putting kosher. They meet in the middle, 4 tefachim of kosher, 4 tefachim of kosher, 4 tefachim of kosher, and now you have even more than 7 tefachim. You have 8 tefachim of kosher schach. And then you could basically use dofen akuma from the others from all sides and that way you have yourself a kosher sukkah. So that is how we would defend the shita, which is, I believe, how we paskin, that you only get up to 4 tefachim of non-kosher schach, and we have to make this so kimta and Rabbi Meir that it's talking about this really weird case in which you have a precisely 8x8 sukkah. And that is basically everything we just said right now, is more or less actually what we saw a few blot ago on Yudalid and that area over there. So hopefully, as I said, it was a good chazara, or it was a chazara. I'll let you judge for yourself. But we don't get off the hook that easily. The Gemara likes to circle back to these, apparently. All right, any questions? All right. Well, just don't put puzzle schach on your sukkah, and you don't run into any of these issues. How about that? That's the good answer. All right. Okay, so we'll conclude over here. Wishing everyone a wonderful evening, a good Shabbos, and
Rabbi, thank you.
All right, take care, guys.
Good job.
Thank you.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.